All right, thanks everyone. Good morning. My name is Chris Menser. I'm the Building Decarbonization Specialist with the Maryland Department of the Environment. I will be moderating today's session. I'm part of the Building Decarbonization team along with Zach and Sam. And today we're also joined by Yin Wu, who is the Building Data Analyst Manager with Montgomery County's Department of Environmental Protection. Thank you for joining the third session of the Benchmarking and Reporting Working Group. Today, Dr. Zach Brzola, affectionately known as Dr. Decarb, will be reviewing the previously released draft guidance on how to submit benchmarking data to both MDE and Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection in Portfolio Manager. We will also be answering some frequently asked questions. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded and uploaded to Maryland Department of the Environment's BEPS YouTube playlist. We will share a link to the slides in the description of the video after it has been posted to the YouTube playlist. If time permits, there will be a portion for Q&A at the end. And just want to know the chat has been disabled. In order to submit questions for the Q&A, you'll need to click on the activities button, which is found in the bottom corner of the screen. It shows a circle, triangle, square, and the Q&A feature is accessible via this button. We will also be doing a poll at the beginning of the session. You can access the poll feature with the activities button as well. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Zach Brzola, Section Head of MDE's Building Decarbonization Team. All right, Zach, it's all yours.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks everyone for being here. I also just wanted to, Yin, if you could pop on camera for a minute just to do a quick introduction before we dive in. Really wanted to thank Yin for joining us today. We've been working very closely with Montgomery County DEP to ensure that this really works well for everybody if you're reporting to both jurisdictions. Well, anyway, we'll keep going, but Yin may join us, chime in later as necessary. So, Chris, perfect. If before we dive in, if you require an overview of BEPS, this is your first time hearing about Maryland's Building Energy Performance Standards, or BEPS, we would point you to our previous webinars and technical documentation that is available for viewing on the department's BEPS website. You can access the website by scanning the QR code on the left side of your screen, or by searching Maryland BEPS in Google, like just about every one of us does anyway. You can also find on, if you'd like to be added to our email list, you can do so by scanning the QR code on the right side of your screen. And that's where we announce any new updates to documentation as we make things final. Today's webinar really is focused on a specific aspect of BEPS implementation, but if you have any questions regarding the proposed regulation, you can contact the team via the email address at the phone number or the phone number at the bottom of your screen, beps.mde@maryland.gov. We also, as Chris mentioned, again, if this is your first time here, I'm going to encourage you to go and watch some of the videos on YouTube, because that's where we have a lot of the information really building up to where we are here, which is a deep technical dive into benchmarking and reporting for the state. So that's why we're here today. If you go to the next slide, please, Chris. Our agenda today, we're going to start with a poll question. Then we'll talk a little bit about this draft document we released last working group, which was the Montgomery County and MDE alignment document, which is basically where we've made some additional clarifications and updates to help building owners who are benchmarking in both jurisdictions. We've gotten a ton of questions, so we've actually prepared a whole bunch of frequently asked questions for you all, just to try to provide some additional clarity that we've gotten along the way to as many questions as we can. One of those as well has been about how to actually view net direct emissions in Portfolio Manager. that we're talking about for this regulation. So we actually have a new guidance document to release from this working group on that. It's a pretty straightforward one, so that'll come towards the end. And then if we've got time, and that's a big if, we'll get into Q&A as you have them. But please drop your questions in the chat. All the frequently asked questions we're sharing today came from some form of folks asking it in the chat or asking us it via emails. So we take all of that in, and we do our best to start aggregating and responding to that along the way. So let's dive in. And before we really get started, here's this poll question just to see where we are in the room. What category of buildings do you plan to benchmark in Portfolio Manager? And pick the number that corresponds to your property type. Is it going to be an office, a warehouse, a multifamily housing building, a campus, or something else? There's 80 different property types that you might be benchmarking under. So we know there's a lot, but these are some of the top ones. Just want to see where everybody is and who's here in the room. And again, if you came in and missed the instructions, you can access the poll by circle, triangle, square button in the bottom right corner of your screen, and there you can go to poll. That's also where you'll be able to answer the Q&A or enter Q&A questions as you get it. So give everybody another moment here. Again, circle, triangle, square, bottom right corner of your screen. Votes coming in. Fantastic. We've got over 40 votes. I'll show the results out for everybody. It looks like the majority of people here are benchmarking a campus. Folks, great. I'm glad you're here. There's a lot of good information here. We also are running a campus compliance working group that's separate and specifically deals with how to benchmark campuses. So there's a lot of this guidance today will still apply, but the campuses are all handled a little bit differently. So I will just flag that. You can sign up for our campus compliance working group via our website. We have a sign up form, just how you sign up for this session, and you can choose campus compliance. So I'm guessing everybody's coming to those as well, but if you're new here, want to make sure that you're getting to the right place additionally, because campuses are a little bit unique. And with that, let's keep moving. Well, and the good news is too, there's all sorts of buildings types represented, so this should be good for you all today. So as I mentioned earlier, we released a month ago this draft document. Thank you to everybody who provided feedback. If you haven't yet reviewed the document, we're going to extend our timing on it. It says that it says on it that it was still due a few days ago. We're going to give folks a little bit longer. So by the 22nd, next Friday, please provide any feedback you have if you have additional thoughts here. We're already planning to make a few tweaks based on the feedback we've received, but we look forward to any additional feedback you have. That link for the document just dropped in the chat, and the feedback form is actually right on top in the document itself. And I wanted to, based on the feedback we received, I wanted to clarify. This guidance also applies if you're reporting for another entity, like if you're reporting a multifamily housing building to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or trying for things like Energy Star certification. So there are some specific exemptions. A lot of the exclusions are consistent across Portfolio Manager. There are specific things, mainly food service facilities, that are unique to MDE, and we've got the guidance on how to report that here, so that you don't adjust your metrics for those other programs. Now, I will note, and I'll say it again later, that does mean when you look in Portfolio Manager, what you're seeing is not what you're going to get at the end of the day from MDE if you're following some of this outside guidance or this additional guidance. It's just a limitation of making sure that everybody can use the same property to report to multiple jurisdictions. And again, this guidance and everything else we've been working on through this working group, we're going to incorporate that into our final benchmarking guide, which will be a document that we're going to compile and finalize here to help everybody in the new year as you work towards our June 1st, 2025 reporting deadline for all buildings covered under BEPS. Well, let's get into it now. This guidance document is going to we're going to talk a little bit about electric vehicle charging, parking, heated pools, and food service facilities, and I'm actually going to walk you through the guidance today. So again, you're going to get the chance to provide feedback as well after this session. So if we go to the next slide, here's what building owners should do for EV charging in order of data availability. Number one, you're going to omit EV charging if it's captured on a separate meter. I would recommend, if you don't have separate meters for your EV charging, you should probably get them. And especially if you're going to go install new EV charging, we encourage you to spec that as you're doing it. It doesn't have to be per specific charger, but for if you're installing multiple, it's really good to do this because then it's the least amount of guessing and work. So if you've got it separately metered, just omit it. If you have it sub-metered, you're going to deduct that EV charging via negative meter and omit EV charging station as a property type in Portfolio Manager. Then the third one, if you don't have separately metered charging and it's not sub-metered, you're going to enter EV charging as a property use type in Portfolio Manager and fill out the requested information. It's going to ask you a couple of questions around the number and type of chargers. The guidance document actually has a link right to that, the specific guidance on how to enter this from Portfolio Manager, and we'll point you to that. We don't want to duplicate the guidance from Portfolio Manager there. And then Portfolio Manager is actually going to estimate an energy use for that charger based on the information you enter. And that will get subtracted on the back end from your performance metrics. And I'm sure I'm going to get a question because we got it in the feedback already about how to actually view what those estimated energy use metrics are. That's coming up in the guidance document. We'll talk about it at the end of today. So we will be getting there. Let's go on to the next slide. Talk a little bit about parking. Parking, I want to level set at the beginning here. Parking of any type, whether it's a garage, an underground lot, a surface lot, it's excluded from your gross floor area of the building for purposes of determining whether it is a covered building or not. So if your building is 40,000 square feet, but 10,000 square feet of it is parking garage, but 10,000 of that square feet is parking garage, you are, in the eyes of BEPS, for Maryland at the state level, 30,000 square feet and not covered. So you'd be out. Now, if your building is 40,000 square feet and you only have 5,000 square feet of garage parking, let's say it's 40,001 square feet and you have 5,000 square feet of parking, you're over 35,000 square feet. You are thus a covered building. However, the energy used for this parking area can be excluded. So to do this, we have the same 3 steps that we've been talking about previously. You're going to omit parking energy use if it is captured on a separate meter, and you're going to not report parking floor area as a property type in the benchmarking report. If you have it sub-metered, you're going to deduct parking energy use via the negative meters and do not report that parking GFA as a property type in the benchmarking report. If it's neither separately metered nor sub-metered, you're going to enter it as a use type and fill out the information in Portfolio Manager. Again, we point to the guidance document from Portfolio Manager on how to do this. And so you can then get estimated energy use will be deducted from the performance for that building. Same comment above about seeing those metrics. We'll get to that later. Let's talk about heated pools. If your outdoor heated pools especially are sub-metered, Portfolio Manager's best practice is to exclude them from your property. So you should, in order of data availability, omit your pool energy use and don't report it as a property type if it's captured on a separate meter. If it's sub-metered, you're going to deduct it. And if neither, you're going to fill out the information in Portfolio Manager, which helps you get through some estimated energy use metrics. For MDE, we're going to use that estimated energy use and subtract that from your performance metrics. In Montgomery County, they handle pools a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, it's kind of applying similarly. So let's go on to the next one, which is food service facilities. Food service facilities are kind of the number one thing when we get asked what's different between Maryland BEPS and Montgomery County's DEP's BEPS. It's food service facility exclusion. This was something put in the law by the state legislature when the Climate Solutions Now Act, which authorized BEPS, passed. They said we need to exclude the energy use from food service facilities. And so basically, this is just now being able to pull this information out for buildings that are already reporting to Montgomery County. And so standalone food service facilities over 25,000 square feet in Montgomery County are only going to report to Montgomery County's DEP. Those buildings will never report to MDE because they're exempted. Because that, especially the standalone type, is exempted, if that is a standalone building, they're listed on our covered buildings list, they can apply for exemption. For food service facilities within other buildings, which is going to be far and away the example, in many cases, they're actually already going to be excluded from Montgomery County DEP's BEPS reporting based on the DEP's definition of a building, which excludes tenant spaces from benchmarking and BEPS requirements if they're less than 25,000 square feet, separately metered for all utilities, and do not share interior area with the rest of the building. Again, this is just based on DEP's definition. This has nothing to do with MDE for the state. But those, for that reason, they've been finding that most of these food service facilities are already excluded from most buildings. Because we want to be very thorough, I'm about to go into 3 slides to explain this process if that doesn't apply. Right? If you are going to include that food service facility in your reporting to DEP, how do you deal with it for Maryland? And that's if, again, following that same pattern of if it's separately metered, sub-metered, or neither separately metered nor sub-metered. So let's get into if it's separately metered. If you're not reporting that food service facility energy use to DEP, continue to exclude it based on what we just talked about. If you must report it to DEP, you need to ensure that the GFA is entered as the restaurant property type and portfolio manager. This tells us to look for that exclusion. You're going to enter the annual energy used from this separate meter into custom use detail 1, setting the units to kilowatt hours. So basically for any electric use, it goes into custom use detail 1, you set the units to kilowatt hours, and any gas use, you set it as custom use detail 2 and set it to therms for that kind of fuel-fired energy use. And you're going to name those fields because you can name them in Portfolio Manager, food service facility metered, and either electric or fuel energy use. We're going to subtract that energy use from your final performance metrics, although, again, it won't be reflected in Portfolio Manager. We're pretty confident that this manual entry will really only occur for a small number of buildings. And so we have this, we put it in the guidance because we've heard from folks like there is a case or two, so we want to have standard guidance for everybody. But this is going to be what it is. And the reason we use custom use detail 1 and 2 is that it doesn't affect your performance for DEP, but you would we would reflect it on the back end for Maryland. And so it really is important for our calculation methods as well that you do use that custom use detail 1 for electric, custom use detail 2 for fuel fired. Additionally, a note, the EPA portfolio manager generally advises that you include the floor area of small food service spaces as part of your primary property type, because that's pretty standard. You have a little cafe in many buildings. And that would be standard across lots of them, so that's how you would benchmark. However, in order for MDE to provide a food service exemption, you must report the floor area of any food service areas inside your building as a separate restaurant property type if you're not already excluding it because it's separately or sub-metered. So now, what if it's not separately metered? If it's sub-metered, If you're not reporting this food service facility energy use to DEP, again, you're going to keep excluding it. But if it's included in reporting to DEP, you're going to need to ensure that the floor area is entered as a restaurant property type in Portfolio Manager. Again, this tells us to look for an exclusion. If it's all electric, you're going to enter the annual energy used from this submeter in custom use detail 1 and set the units to kilowatt hours, and name that field the food service facility metered electric energy use. If it's a mixed fuel facility, you're going to enter electric use in custom use detail 1, doing the same thing, and enter fuel use in custom use detail 2, setting the units to therms. That second field is going to be called food service facility metered fuel energy use. We're going to subtract this energy use from your final performance metrics. And again, it will not be reflected in Portfolio Manager, but that's where we have to be for this. Now, finally, if you don't have separate or submetering of that facility, you're going to add a property use type of restaurant to Portfolio Manager for that food service facility space. You're going to include the GFA of that property use type. And then you're going to use the standard deduction formulas for food service facilities listed in section A:2.1.4.1. I know it's really long. You can also just control find it in the TM. TM 24-01, our technical manual for BEPS, which is available as part of the regulatory package and on the website. I've also put it up here for clarity to calculate the deductions for your food service facility. So here's actually how you're going to enter that exempted energy. If it's an all-electric facility, you're going to enter the calculated energy use in custom use detail 1 in Portfolio Manager. So you actually have to do the electric factor is 60 for all electric. It's 67.2 kilowatt hours per square foot. You multiply your square footage by that factor and enter that kilowatt hour value in custom use detail 1. If it's a mixed fuel facility, you're going to enter the calculated electric energy use in custom use detail 1 using the electric factor for that mixed fuel and call that food service facility estimated electric energy use and set the units to kilowatt hours. In custom use detail 2, you'll multiply this therms factor by the square foot and enter the number of therms into custom use detail 2. And again, enter the title. In this case, it would be estimated. We put metered here because of the guidance on the previous page. If you're putting it in as a sub-meter, that's where you would do it. Just by saying metered, that allows us to all be clear on whether you're using that metric or whether you're entering it based on calculation. Or meter, sorry. Well, that was a mouthful. Again, the good news is this is all in the guide. You can go look at it afterwards. You can also watch this recording when we put it up on YouTube in a little while. I'm sure I think I saw some questions trickle in, so we'll be sure to we'll try to get to them today, and again, if not, in the future. So, third-party verification, another one we get a lot of questions about. Maryland's BEPS requires third-party verification every 5 years, starting in 2026. And Montgomery County also has a verification requirement. It's a little bit different, but you can overlap the two, and we've described how to do it in the guidance document. But basically, if the data submission in any year must be verified by a third party for the state, and you at the same year have an overlap for the county, you're advised to use a third-party verifier with a credential required by both jurisdictions and follow the third-party the verification requirements for both jurisdictions verification. And at that point, the same verification report can satisfy the requirements for both jurisdictions, so you only have to do it once. So really, this is meant to streamline that process. And again, that's not going to happen. Well, it might happen depending on the timing of your verification with the two different jurisdictions. Now, we get a lot of questions about these next two notes, so we put them in bold here for everybody. A third party can provide both benchmarking and verification services to a building if they have the correct credentials. So you can hire somebody to do benchmarking for your building. They can also provide that verification if they've got the right credentials for the statewide BEPS. However, for statewide BEPS, third-party verification cannot be carried out by a building owner's staff, right? So, or the building owner themselves, right? So third-party verification is just that. It needs to be done by a third party for the state. So hopefully that helps clarify some of these frequently asked questions here. We are going to talk more about third-party verification in future sessions, but that really for now, because that's not till 2026, this is kind of the main thing we wanted to get in front of everybody so that you have information. And if you're looking for help with third-party verifiers, you can use the Energy Star Licensed Professional Finder, which we'll drop a link in the chat for. And they have a lot of information on finding existing registered providers. Now, let's get to exclusions. And I wanted to thank you all again for the feedback you've provided on the benchmarking guide up until now. We got a lot of great input, and we're going to try to help provide some clarity here, and we're going to make some updates as we finalize that benchmarking guide to reflect some of the suggestions you all had. And somebody also caught a typo. We always appreciate it. It happens. So thank you for that feedback as well. We received a ton of questions about exclusions in the benchmarking guide, and so we wanted to bring this back up to the top here. This wasn't in the benchmarking guide before because it's in our TM 24-01 that goes with the regulation, but we will add it in the benchmarking guide. That was great feedback. So we'll make sure it's also in the benchmarking guide so you don't have to look at two documents. There are a number of energy uses that can be excluded from benchmarking as part of Maryland BEPS. Food service facilities, we've already covered that. Electric vehicle charging, again, already kind of covered how the mechanics of doing that. You can also exclude emissions from required combustion equipment under the following conditions, which says, in general, a backup generator, if it's federal or state regulation requires a covered building to use that generator or other equipment that must run on combustible fuels. So there is an exemption for that. For those buildings, we're going to actually have an exemption request form. That's a whole different working group on exemption requests. But they will submit an exemption request. And then for just those buildings, we're going to have kind of an annual reporting to pull out any of that delivered fuel or otherwise, energy used by those exempt pieces of equipment. Now, there's a whole bunch of other exclusions based on what portfolio manager allows. So this is, other electricity uses excluded by the benchmarking tool, which includes cell towers, parking garages, the outdoor heated pools, why we put that guidance up there, and a large billboard or projection screen on a building or its parking lot when the sign is not related to the use of the building. A sign displaying the company's name or anything related to the building itself must be counted. And there's some really good FAQ on specifically this from Portfolio Manager. And so that's where we're getting this from. This also includes trash compactors, well pumps, and an aeration fountain in retention ponds used to prevent algae growth. Again, a whole lot of words here. This is all going to be in the updated guide, but you can find it today in the TM 24-01. So these are all sorts of miscellaneous end uses that can be excluded. Now that we've gotten to that, we've gotten a lot of I want to start answering some additional frequently asked questions, including many which came through that benchmarking guide. Again, feel free as we're going, if you have additional questions, drop them in the Q&A feature at the circle, triangle, square in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer them here or try to get to them in a future session. So, the first question, could you clarify the definition and property types eligible to be considered as food service, since Portfolio Manager has multiple property types under food service? And so in the regulation itself, it actually defines, the proposed BEPS regulation defines food service explicitly. So it's not really about property types, it's about what's going on in those facilities, and that's defined in the regulation. So food service facility has the meaning stated in COMAR. If we go to the next slide, please. In COMAR 10.15.3.2b. So if you wanted to, you could go to this section of COMAR, the Maryland regulations, which is all from the Maryland Department of Health. And this is linked to in the proposed regulation, but we've done it for you here. We'll be sure to put this in the benchmarking guide for everybody as well. A food service facility includes, this is going to be a bit of a doozy, folks, so bear with me. But we're putting it here so that you have it as guidance in the interim, and then it will be in the final guide as well. It includes a restaurant, coffee shop, cafeteria, short order cafe, luncheonette, tavern, sandwich stand, soda fountain, retail market, or retail bakery outlet. Also includes a food operation in an industry, institution, healthcare facility, club, school, camp, church, catering kitchen, commissary, or similar place in which food or drink is prepared for sale on or off, for sale or for service on the premises or elsewhere. And a micro market, licensed under the business regulation article, Title 17, Subtitle 17, Annotated Code of Maryland, COMAR, and meeting the requirements of that chapter, this chapter as a food service facility. Whole bunch of things, but basically you can in Portfolio Manager select some of these sub things like a restaurant or others. Any one of these qualifies as a food service facility, and so those are the ones. And this is one place where it doesn't really matter the different types in Portfolio Manager. It matters, do you meet this definition? So now that I've said what it includes, I also want to just point out, because we get this a lot, what it does not include. It does not include a facility that offers only prepackaged foods that are not potentially hazardous, a kitchen in a private home where food is prepared at no charge for the guests in the home, or for guests at a social gathering that is not a public event, or for service to unemployed, homeless, or another disadvantaged population. Food preparation or serving area where food is prepared or served only by an excluded organization, hotel, lodging, or rooming house that serves only a continental breakfast, farmer's market, a public event where food products are specified of this regulation are sold, and a bake sale where non-potentially hazard baked goods, whatever, or a cottage food business. So, I mean, I put this up here more for information. What we care about when we're evaluating food service exemption is everything on the previous slide. But folks asked us about it, so we wanted to put this up here. Again, actually, only the previous slide is what's incorporated in the regulation as what it includes. So, again, I know it's long, but I wanted to put this all in front of you. Let's go to the next question. Are garden-style buildings with covered walkways between two buildings a single building? And the answer to this is no. There's two ways to see that this is no. One is that that's not functional space per the definition of Portfolio Manager. If you look in the FAQ, it'll tell you the breezeways is what they call them, these covered walkways. Those don't count as part of the square footage, and those are then two separate buildings. It also does not meet the MDE definition of a building in the regulation, which is all about the kind of structure of a single building. Like that is not that walkway doesn't, connecting the two doesn't, it's not conditioned, it's not providing any support structurally. And so those are two separate buildings. If you cut that walkway out, the two buildings that connect would stand anyway. And so those are two separate buildings. Now that I've said that though, however, there is, and if this was a multifamily, it's generally multifamily properties, Portfolio Manager allows, so that's for, let me go back. This is all about if they're included for how, basically if you're determining if they're included in that 35,000 square foot threshold or above. So they would be separate buildings for that. Now, when it comes to if they are already in the covered under the regulation, then they could benchmark as a kind of a campus because they're multifamily buildings. Portfolio Manager allows all those buildings to be entered in as one entry. And so that's just a bit of a unique situation for multifamily properties and hospitals and another property type, the senior living. And you can, if you have questions about that, see the recording we posted on our campus compliance on the YouTube page. We went into this in great detail. But those property types, basically, you can submit them as one entry to the department for benchmarking purposes. But for coverage purposes, what I was talking about at the beginning is what applies. Let's go to the next question. Are structures with wholly separate energy systems connected by a party wall a single building? Well, when we look at this, this is what you might commonly see in a place like a strip mall. And the answer is yes, these buildings are going to be a single building for purposes of determining coverage under the regulation. And that comes down to, again, the definition of a building in the regulation, which comes from the International Building Code. And basically all you have to think about is for there to be two buildings, they have to be structurally separate. If they could stand on their own and be that's what kind of makes them separate and two different buildings that you wouldn't count. So this is the kind of really important distinction here. But for most people, if you're a strip mall, we're counting the whole building as one. And just because we are talking a little bit about Montgomery County here, they have a slightly different interpretation of that. I'm not going to get into it, but I do want to just flag this comes up a lot because there is a slight difference in how buildings are defined based on the requirements of the state law and in Montgomery County. Let's go on to the next question. If a collection of buildings has shared meters within the buildings, but not across standalone buildings, are they counted as one building? And this, again, we took a lot of these verbatim from things people asked us. So the answer here, basically to think about is you've got, again, probably a multifamily building, probably a garden style apartment, could be something else, but multiple buildings. And within that, the individual units have shared meters, but each building is separately metered. In that case, each of those buildings is a building. There's none of this shared meter happening. And so again, this is all about for coverage of a building. Those are individual buildings. So you would not be, one of the reasons this comes up for folks that maybe aren't as deep into this, you've got to be 35,000 square feet or above to be a covered building, excluding the parking garage area. But if you've got shared meters or heating and cooling systems, then it's the total square footage served by that, not counting district energy systems, right? So if you've got two 20,000 square foot buildings, but they share an HVAC system, that counts for purposes of coverage as one 40,000 square foot building, and it's it's covered by the regulation. And so that's where this is coming from. And the answer is here really, again, to reiterate, because I've been speaking for a while on this one, is that no, if the meters or systems are only shared within individual standalone buildings, they count separately. But again, that's only for coverage. If you're, as I mentioned before, see the campus compliance, if you're trying to do more campus compliance or benchmarking a multifamily property, it could be a little bit different. But yeah, these are separate. So it's the metering across buildings. All right, let's go to the next one. Yeah, this is the one we get a lot. How do I request energy data from a utility? How does it work, and what do I do if I run into problems? So we will have in our guidance and on our website a document that talks about how to get this data, the contact information, and a web link for all the different utilities in the state. And so each utility has a very similar but might be slightly different process for requesting the data. Any investor-owned utilities with 40,000 or more customers is going to actually provide this data right into your portfolio manager account. And so you'll have to do one request to get all the data together, go back and forth with them maybe a couple of times to make sure all of the meters are right. But then at that point, they'll just be updating this data in your account. And so, and the way this is going to work is going to be, and so this document, we've outlined some of this in the technical manual, and it's based on requirements for the utility. But a lot of the other pieces we're just still working on because we're gathering it for all the different utilities. So that's coming soon. We'll also have a contact person for each utility. If you run into problems, they're going to be your first person to go to. You're going to reach out to them and say, I've requested the data. I have an issue with it. Please help me. And they're going to help you. And if you still, after all of that, have problems, you can come back to us and say, here's all the stuff I sent to the utility. Here's my problem. And then we will do our best to help and facilitate any issues there are. And basically as well, the way that this is going to work at a high level for benchmarking, when you're doing this, you're going to actually have a request for those meter mapping. And this is a question we get. I've got 500 meters in my building. How do I make sure that I'm getting all the right data for my building? And the way it's intended to work is that you're going to send information about your building and ideally at least one confirmatory meter number. Your master meter for that hallway in that big building that says this is my building and here's the things to base it off of. You're going to send it to the utility. They're going to send back all the meters they see at that property. And then you've got to review that. You do need to make sure, yeah, there's 400 units plus a central meter, and I get 401 meters back. It all looks good. You're going to say that's great. Or maybe you're like, oh, I'm missing one, or I've got the building across the street somehow ended up on this one. And then you'll have to go back and revise it. So there is going to be an iterative process. Utilities have 90 days to provide you that data in the first place. And then through this revision, it might take a little longer. So we are saying you really need to submit these requests by March to your utility providers. And all of this is going to be coming in the new year as we move forward. So coming up soon, and more details to come on that front. But all of this to say is we've been thinking deeply about this. We held a whole working group with the utilities over the summer to get all of this stood up, and they are working and coordinating with us to make sure that all that information is available to you. So let's go to the next one. Portfolio Manager allows for measuring to the exterior face of the wall or the interior. This is referring to gross floor area. And which do we prefer? So the answer is either. You can do whichever one that works, because that's what Portfolio Manager says you can do, and we want to align with that whenever possible. So take whichever one you have. Most people only have one of those, and you're probably going to go with it because trying to do something different is difficult. So the answer is we don't have a preference here. But yeah, I will just read this definition out loud so that everybody has it as well. The gross floor area is the total property square footage as measured between the exterior walls of the buildings, right? So we define it as the exterior, but it's also acceptable to measure from inside perimeter of the exterior walls if that is more readily available. And that includes all areas inside the buildings, including supporting areas. It doesn't include things like chases or stuff like that in a sub, not a full floor. You can find Portfolio Manager's guidance for that as well. They have a really good FAQ document on this, and that's what we'll take. So let's go to the next one. I think we've hit all the frequently asked questions we're going to get to for now. Yeah, and what I wanted to share with you is a new guidance document draft for how to view direct emissions metrics. This is brand new because people were asking how to see. One of the challenges right now, if you go into Portfolio Manager, direct emissions is not one of the metrics you see the first time you open up an account. You actually have to adjust it. So today, we're releasing document, and we worked really hard with the portfolio manager team to get it. We're going to share a link in the chat for you to view it and download it. And you can actually, the feedback form that we just sent, it has the link in it as well. Please take a look and provide any feedback as you see fit. It's a pretty straightforward document, and it just walks you through, and I'm not going to do it live because I don't want to take everybody's time, but it just walks you through. There's a handful of steps to be able to go in and adjust the view in your portfolio manager setup so that you can bring direct emissions right onto the main page for you, and you can see the direct emissions. And it's not, I will again clarify, direct emissions for us is direct emissions that emitted. There is a separate field that's all about location aware direct emissions. That includes some of the emissions from electricity generation. That is not what we're looking at here. For Maryland BEPS, we're looking at direct emissions, and the guidance walks you through it. It will also tell you how to bring out the weather normalized fuel usages. If you actually mostly the estimated energy metrics, but you can also see and use that if you want to look at some of the weather normalized fuel usage. So there's a few different ways to see that. But it also walks you through how to do it for your main property, but also the kind of individuals if you want to get to a more detailed view. And that's where if you have an estimated energy use metric for, say, EV charging and you want to view that, this guidance document tells you how to look at that data set. So if you really are in the weeds and been struggling with this, look at that document. It talks you through how to pull that information up front. And again, this is the kind of thing we'll plop into our main benchmarking guide at the end of the day. We have the guidance out right now in draft, and then as you have time, take a look before December 6th so that we can finalize it and incorporate all our guidance. So speaking of that, let's go to the next slide. Our next meeting, actually, yeah, so there's one other thing I wanted to talk about too. And this goes back to, again, feedback we received and information that I was just talking about a little bit before. If you have an issue with getting your benchmarking data, and specifically actually if it's updated after, but we have this new form called a benchmarking data correction request. And you can select on that form why you might have to do a benchmarking data request. So if your electric or gas company had a data correction and it provided you data after the reporting deadline, you're going to be able to submit this form, say that, and then we'll allow you to basically update your metrics after the deadline occurred because you got new information from them. You can also use this for just general energy data correction if data was identified as incorrect after the reporting deadline. You were doing some review and you found it to be wrong. You can submit this and we'll review that and consider that, accepting that and readjusting your data. Property data correction. If you had changes to your property, something was wrong, your square footage was wrong, or your use type was wrong after the deadline, you can submit this to help. Or other, you can submit this for more general kind of other things. And if it's other, you got to describe what it is and why. And input the year and provide any supporting documentation. What this is 9 times out of 10 is going to be if you get, we got asked, what happens if my utility, electric or gas company sends me a data correction request after the deadline or basically on the deadline. This will allow you to submit that documentation to the department and will allow you to go and make that change, and no penalty to you especially for that one. So this is we wanted to just put this up here. If you have any specific feedback about this, we didn't make a feedback form for this one, but you can send us an email at beps.mde@maryland.gov if you have any questions on this one. Again, you can look at the slide afterwards if you have other thoughts. But we wanted to put this up here because it's really was a question we got asked a lot. Well, now with that, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, our next meeting, January 22nd, 2025, 2 to 3 p.m. Save the date. We will be holding this next session, and we'll be handling additional questions and other guidance topics at that time. If you have any questions in the interim, again, we just dropped the link, our email in the chat. You can feel free to email us, but we encourage you to first read all the guidance documents we've been putting out. We've been working really hard to make sure that there's all these documents and a lot of feedback opportunities for all of them. So put your feedback there. If there's something else that can't get answered, feel free to send us that email. We may reserve some of those answers for this session, for this next session. With that, we've got a few minutes for Q&A. So let's move over to that section.
All right, thank you, Zach. All right, just as a reminder for anyone who hasn't already submitted questions, please, you can submit your questions with the Q&A feature under the activities button, which is found in the bottom right corner of the screen. Shows a circle, triangle, and square. And without further ado, first question. The EV chargers we have in our building provide a report of energy used. Can I use this data to report consumption of a negative meter?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you can use that. Yeah, I mean, that is a form of sub-metering for those chargers. So the answer is yes.
Okay, just looking through the questions here. What are the correct credentials for third-party verifiers?
Yeah, this is a good question. These are listed in the technical manual TM 24-01. So I encourage you to go look there again. And we put it up, I think, in the last benchmarking and reporting working group. So I didn't list it again this time. But I'll get do my best to name them all back out. So you could be a professional engineer for a license issued in the U.S., a licensed architect with a U.S. issued license. You can be a certified energy manager or a building energy assessment professional. And those are the main ones that we have allowed. We did announce last time that we were, if you had any additional ones that you felt were really important or met the standards where this was both a professional standard that knows something a lot about buildings and their energy use and has ethical standards around the kind of doing a good, around the profession and ramifications, honestly, if they're not doing a good job with their work, then you can send that certification and all the documentation of that to our email, beps.md@maryland.gov, and we'll consider that because we do allow for additional considerations on this, other different credentials. But if you have suggestions, provide that suggestion and all that documentation to our email. And we'll also continue to be thinking about third-party verification for the whole next year because that doesn't, the first third-party verification for the state doesn't happen until 2026. So we've got some time for that.
Okay, great. What happens, next question. What happens if you use the standard deduction methodology and the amount calculated is greater than the actual usage recorded on the utility meter for the building?
Yes. Well, that's a really interesting one. I really would not expect that to happen because if your utility meter for that building should be capturing everything in that building and then not the, and the standard deduction is only meant for a small amount of the square footage there. If that's the case, honestly, we'll probably flag it on our internal system that you've got a negative there. And we'd encourage you to reach out to us, because that's a kind of a unique case that we would have to just try to understand what's going on. The standard deductions are based on the best, information from a bunch of properties as the average use type, average use for those different specific exemption, for that specific exemption. So it's a best guess. It's an engineering estimate, essentially, just like with EV charging and parking. Portfolio manager does an engineering estimate. So there is going to be some differences, but we want to we need to allow people to have that. So it does exist for that reason. If you're getting some funky results, we encourage you to reach out for that specific one. For most of them, reach out to portfolio manager. They have a great help desk with a whole bunch of documentation, and we've linked to this in the guide. There's a lot of information and frequently asked questions from properties across the country, and a lot of that are dealing with building performance standards in other jurisdictions. So there's a lot of great information there. If you've got a whole host of questions for this really specific thing on food service facilities standard deductions, which is Maryland specific, Maryland statewide BEPS specific, reach out to us if you end up getting something funky, because that's just not unexpected, and we'd want to know about it, and we'd help you sort through it.
Okay, looking through, we might have time for just one more question. Let's see here. Right.
Oh my God. Okay. Like, girl, yeah,
Okay, is there a question here? Okay, is there a published list of covered buildings? I support houses of worship, and they're benchmarking, and I'd love to do the same in Maryland.
Yes, this is a good question. We have preliminary potentially covered buildings list listed online on the BEPS website right now. And so that has the about 9,300 buildings that we identified in our first pass as potentially covered buildings. I'm not sure we'll be able to get the link to you right in this moment, but there it goes. Wow. Thanks, Sam. Got a crack team over here working really hard to get you all this information. But it's also on our website if you want to find it. So that's our first, our preliminary potentially covered buildings list. We're working to review that list right now. But in general, that's the best place to look. And so you can go there and find out more information. And thank you for providing your services for free to those houses of worship. There is in Portfolio Manager and that licensed professional finder, there are a number of folks that say, I will do this for verification, especially for free for certain types of properties. And so we always say thank you to those providers, because we know they're doing a great service for their communities.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zach. Wow, we covered a lot of material today. Thanks everyone for your time and your participation in the benchmarking and reporting working group session number 3. If we didn't have time to answer your question today, we'll work to answer them in future sessions. And we hope everyone will join our next session in January 2025. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded, and it'll be uploaded to MDE's YouTube BEPS playlist. So if you missed the previous session, you're able to watch them and also view the slides or links, which will be in the description of the video. All right. Thanks, everyone, again. This session has concluded, and thanks and have a nice day. That's what I'm